I've become convinced over the last few years that the number one most important determining factor in whether or not a student is going to be able to pick up their Greek New Testament or Hebrew Bible and sit down and read and enjoy it, the number one factor is vocabulary. Often we tend to teach grammar really, really well in our colleges and seminaries. Unfortunately, though, if you are amazing at grammar and syntax, but you don't have a big vocabulary, you'll never be able to sit down and read and enjoy an authentic text. I have had and known plenty of New Testament professors who have PhDs in New Testament who do not have the ability to sit down and read Romans from sight, and they can't sit down and read the Gospel of Luke in the Greek text. These are people who teach Greek every single year, and some of them have been doing it for decades. They have taught grammar and syntax backwards and forwards for years and years and years, and they could tell you everything about every grammatical feature in a given text. But when it comes to reading, they can't do it. And the reason is because they don't have a good vocabulary. Often in the first year of New Testament Greek, students will learn 300 to 400 words. This might sound like a lot, but if you try to approach the Greek text and you only know 300 to 400 words, you don't have a shot. There's no chance you are going to be able to read the text. It doesn't matter how impressive your knowledge of grammar and syntax are, whether you've memorized Smythe's gigantic grammar or A.T. Robertson's massive grammar. If you've memorized all of the Greek grammar and syntax books, but you don't have a big vocabulary, you're not going to be able to read. A couple years ago, I was at the point where I probably knew 1,000 to 1,500 Greek words. I was in that ballpark. And that was the beginning of my New Testament PhD program. And I could read the Gospel of Mark. I had memorized all of the words that appear in Mark. And that had put me up over 1,000 words total. But I couldn't sit down with like Second Peter or even a text like Galatians and just sit down and read and enjoy it. I could translate my way through all of those, but translating is not reading. Translating is a long, arduous, very involved process. What we train students to do with these texts most often is we train them to become translators of the text, so that we assign them like 3 or 5 verses for the week and come back and have these translated next week. And they spend hours translating just a few verses. I can tell you from personal experience with Greek or Hebrew or really any other language, the most frustrating possible thing is having to spend like 10 minutes to read or translate one verse, because every other word you're having to go look it up in a dictionary. Even if you have like a Bible software like Logos or something like that, even if you have to like hover your mouse over the a particular word in the sentence, if you don't know that word, it can feel like you're reading the text. But if you're having to hover your cursor over the word, over every 1 or 2 or 3 words, you are not reading the text, and you are not going to learn those words in the long term either. Because what happens is you're really not even looking at or pronouncing the word, you're just looking at the English gloss. So, what's the solution? Like, what do we do? My advice to anybody taking Greek or Hebrew, any language, but I'm thinking about the biblical languages in particular, is to form a consistent vocabulary habit. You do not want to be the New Testament professor who's been teaching Greek for 30 years and does not possess the ability to sit down and read your Greek New Testament. That is a sad and frustrating place to be. Within 5 years or less of learning the Greek language or the Hebrew language, you should be able to sit down with your Bible and read, most portions of it. Maybe you can't sit down with the book of Job, or maybe you sometimes still get stumped when you're reading parts of Hebrews or something like that. But there's really no excuse. You should be able to read the Gospels. You should be able to read Paul or Revelation or John's epistles. Like, these are not hard texts in Greek. And the way we're going to be able to read these is we are going to build a huge vocabulary. If your goal is to read the text and understand the text by reading it, it is essential that you have a large vocabulary. To put it this way, if you are really good at grammar, but you don't know vocab, you will never be able to understand a text in front of you. You can't just grammar your way to understanding. On the other hand, if your grammar is sort of shaky, but you know all of the words in a text, you can often figure out what a text is trying to say. A couple of years ago, I decided that I was going to learn all of the vocabulary in the New Testament and in the Hebrew Bible. I've been studying Greek and Hebrew for a few years at that point, but I was really tired of getting stumped by words I didn't know. It was just so frustrating to not be able to sit down with any part of my New Testament or Hebrew Bible and just fluently read. I went with the program called Anki. Some people call it Anki. I call it Anki. Anki is a free desktop program. There's a mobile app for iOS and Android. The iOS version of the app is something like $25. I know that sounds incredibly steep, but if you're serious about learning these languages, I can confidently say it is the best $25 I've ever spent in regard to my education. Anki is just an algorithm. It's a spaced repetition algorithm that helps keep track of all of the words that you're learning. So for the New Testament, there's something like 5,400 unique words. In order to know all of the words that appear in the New Testament, you need to memorize over 5,000 words. That might sound like a ton, but it's really not that much. It's a small body of literature. The Hebrew Bible has more, it's over 8,000, something like 8,300 or 8,400. So a good bit more vocabulary for the Hebrew Bible, but still a manageable amount. The problem is, are we going to review all of these words every day? Like, how do we keep track of what to review? Because if I've memorized 2,000 words so far, it's not practical to review all of those every single day. But this is where Anki really shines. When a word appears on the screen on Anki, say it's the word logos in Greek, you see the Greek word, you can tap the screen, and it will reveal the English word for you. You can also do reverse order. But it'll give you 4 options on the bottom of the screen. You can retry the word. That means you got it wrong. You could say you got it, but it was really hard. You could say you got it, but it was good, or you got it, but it was really easy. So easy, good, hard, or wrong. Based on the way that you answer the question, if you say that a word was incredibly easy for you, if you choose easy, it will be a long time before it shows you that word again. On the other hand, if you get the word wrong, it will show you again in that same study session on the same day. And Anki keeps track of how well you know each card in your whole deck. So out of these 5,000 words for the New Testament, it will have data for how well you know all of them. So when Logos appears on my screen, if I've given that, an easy rating over and over and over again, it might be like 20 years before it will show me that word again. On the other hand, if there's a word that I get wrong every single day, it'll show me that word every single day so that I can get more exposure to the words that are really hard for me. And I'm not wasting my time on words that are super easy. This is really helpful because it makes my review time as efficient as possible. I went through the entire New Testament vocabulary set, and you can download these decks on Anki's website. Somebody else has already made them. And I memorized all the words that occur in the Greek New Testament. And it only took about 6 months. That was a pretty aggressive pace, and so maybe it takes you 1 to 2 years. But just think about it. If you spend 2 years learning all the words that appear in the New Testament, you learn 5 to 7 words every day. And you have Anki's help to do it, so you do it in the most efficient way possible. That is a lifetime of reading on the other side of those 2 years. I consider that a really good payoff. That's a great return on your investment. My Hebrew progress has been a little bit slower. I know just over 2,000 words at this point. I'm only doing about 3 words per day. And, I've had seasons where the PhD has been particularly busy or work is particularly busy. We also just had our first child. And so sometimes I'll go weeks or even a couple months where I'm not at introducing any new words each day. I'm only reviewing. And this is still helpful, but hopefully, in a few years, I'll get through that 8,000 word Hebrew deck so I can read any portion of the Hebrew Bible fairly easily. I'll talk about it in another video, but if you want to become really, really good at reading the Greek or Hebrew text, you need to spend a ton of time reading. Reading is a skill that you improve at by doing a ton of it. But if you want to do a ton of reading, you need to know a bunch of words, because reading when you don't know many words is the most frustrating task ever. I hate it. I hate reading text where I don't know the words. That is an awful feeling. It's extremely demotivating. So, if you want to do a ton of reading so that you can become a good reader, investing this time in apps like Anki, learning a ton of vocab, learning thousands of words, this is a great investment for you to become a lifelong reader of these texts. I generated my own Septuagint vocabulary deck with 15,000 words in it. And once I get through the Hebrew Bible deck, I'll work my way through that too. Thankfully, I have this huge leg up because I've already learned about 5,000 in the New Testament. And with other Attic texts, I've also learned a lot of Attic vocabulary as well. I've tried to convince some of my friends who also learn Greek and Hebrew to do this, to build these giant vocabularies, thousands and thousands of words. So far, I have not been successful. Nobody has taken this advice. But for me personally, in my journey of learning these languages, these vocabulary habits, I spend 15 to maybe 25 minutes each day, depending on my review load. That's all I spend each day working on vocabulary, and it pays huge dividends in reading the text of Scripture. Because I put in that time in Greek vocabulary, it's a very manageable thing for me to now read 3 to 5 chapters of my Greek New Testament every single day. And I can read it at the same speed that I read an English text because I know all the words on my page. And because I've also spent so much time reading, all of the grammar and syntax is just totally intuitive. It's basically like reading a text in my native language. Now, to be sure, it would not be as easy for me to go sit down with Josephus or Plato or something like this because I haven't spent all that time learning their vocabulary. As I continue in this, I will make Anki decks for vocabulary outside of the New Testament as well. I've already done some of that, but I'll continue to do it. So hopefully, over a few decades, I will know tens of thousands of Greek words. So that's my challenge to you. If you've struggled with the biblical languages, maybe you've taken 2 semesters or 2 years of one of these languages, you know the grammar backwards and forwards. You can tell me about all the cases. You can tell me about verb tenses. You can tell me about syntactical categories. You can tell me 40 uses of the genitive. But you still can't read a text comfortably and just have a good time. If reading 2 or more chapters of your Greek New Testament every single day sounds like a huge laborious chore, here's my encouragement to you. Learn a ton of vocabulary. And that habit of doing that alongside reading every day, these are mutually reinforcing habits. Doing a lot of reading gives me more contact with these vocab words that I'm learning through flashcards. And practicing my flashcards means that I'm going to recognize them and know what they mean when I do encounter them in the Greek text. That's my advice. Learn as much vocabulary as possible, especially in your early stages. Just commit that you're going to learn at least 1,000 words per year. That's only 3 words per day. That's manageable for anybody, no matter what your schedule is, no matter what your commitments are. 3 to 5 words per day. If you can get up to 7, that's great. You'll make 2,000 words per year. You'll make more progress. But if we don't do this, we're going to be stuck maybe teaching these languages for decades and not being able to sit with our Bibles open and read these texts and enjoy them. And I don't know about you, we all have different goals for these texts, but I ultimately want to be able to just read and meditate on and enjoy these texts without, consulting a lexicon every 30 seconds. That sounds like a lot of fun to me. And as I've had that experience, it's one of the most joyful and motivating experiences of my life. There's more to say about biblical languages and the way we learn them here, but today I just wanted to highlight vocabulary. This is maybe the most important piece if you've sort of got these other parts of learning in place. So keep at it. Let me know what your vocabulary habits are in the comments. I'm always interested to hear about that. I think it is severely undervalued. So thanks for listening. Happy learning and keep at it.